In the second section of cellular respiration, we want to remind ourselves that everything that we just previously discussed was a part of aerobic cellular respiration. So it required oxygen in order to finish out and to produce 26 molecules of ATP in electron transport, 2 in citric acid, and 2 in glycolysis. However, we do know that cells can generate energy without oxygen. This is known as anaerobic respiration. So, for example, what happens in your muscles is that during intense exercise, we know that muscles, as they're continuing to work, they're going to run low on oxygen. And so when they run low on oxygen, ATP comes from glycolysis only. Now, when there is no oxygen, that means there is no electron transport chain. And so what happens then is NAD levels decrease because all that NAD is being turned into NADH, but it has nowhere to dump its electrons. And so because there's no electron transport chain, and so because it has nowhere to dump its electrons, muscle cells have to move into fermentation in order to regenerate NAD in order to continue catching. Now, the problem with this, though, is because it produces so much NADH, it's going to give off a byproduct known as lactic acid. Because, see, NADH, again, there's no electron transport chain, so it has nowhere to dump its electrons. So instead, it takes its extra electrons and it dumps them or gives them to pyruvic acid. Now, by doing that, it produces lactic acid, which we know can be toxic to our cells. And so what our cells must then do is take the lactic acid, transport it back to the liver where there is oxygen present, and so then that lactic acid can be converted to pyruvic acid, which is no longer dangerous to our cells. Now, this explains why we then have an oxygen debt, because we've used up this oxygen in order to convert this lactic acid into something that's not toxic for our cells. So this explains why you continue to breathe heavily after you stop working out, because you're trying to replenish this oxygen debt that you used up. It also explains a phenomenon that we call hitting the wall. I don't know if you've ever worked out to a point where your muscles just gave out, and it's because you've accumulated this lactic acid. And so your muscles, by producing this lactic acid, there's so much of an oxygen debt, it becomes too large, your cells can't replenish it, and so your muscles just basically quit working. So we know that lactic acid is a byproduct of fermentation, so this is a reason why we can't stay in fermentation too long. But now we do know that fermentation, again, it does, give you a boost of energy to get through those workouts. But the other thing to know about fermentation is that it can be beneficial by microbes. See, they use fermentation to transform milk sugars into lactic acid to produce things like yogurt or sour cream or cheese. We also know that yeast cells take glucose, and through fermentation they can produce ethyl alcohol, which can be used to make bread rise. It can also be used in brewing. So fermentation is a valuable process that can be used by lots of different types of organisms.